Hey class. In this video I'll be talking about keyboard interaction, and we'll be adding to the sound video that we did in the last class. We'll use keyboard events to play different sounds. We'll combine that with some logic to make some visualizations to create a simple keyboard sound sampler. So we'll start with the basics of keyboard interaction. I'm going to open up GitHub desktop. Make sure I'm on my MMP 210 folder and click Show in Finder. So I'm going to keep working with my sound project so that I can continue to use these sound files that I have. So I'll just duplicate sound version 1. And so this will be sound version 2. So I'll keep those same files, but I'm going to rewrite most of the code. So then I'll open up MMP 210 in Sublime and open up index.html inside of my sound version 2 project and just change this one to a 2. Everything else can stay the same. And then I'll open up the sketch and just delete everything to start. So I'll make a new comment and just say sound sampler version 2. To start, let's just go over some keyboard events and then we'll add sounds afterwards. We're going to be looking at our P5 events for the keyboard. So I'll go to p5js.org and go to the reference page. And here, if I go to events, we'll see events related to the keyboard. So we have keyIsPressed. This just tells us whether or not a key is pressed. There's key, which gives us the value of the last key that was pressed. So it's sort of like mouse X or mouse Y. Key code, it gives us a number value for each key. In the computer, each keyboard key is assigned to a number so that we can reference it in our code. And there are different websites. I use keycode.info where you can see what the numbers for each key are. So for example, A is 65, B is 66, C is 67, enter is 13, space is 32, escape is 27. So there's different numbers that are mapped to each one of the keys. JavaScript also keeps different values. So the key is like what we'll see with the key value. Event.which is the number, and then the event key code is key A. So we'll be able to use those to differentiate our keys. We also have some functions like keyPressed. We can do something when the key is pressed. This is sort of like mouse pressed. So it happens whenever the key is pressed. Key released is when the key is released. Key typed is like mouse clicked. It's when the key is pressed and then released. And then key is down will just tell us true or false if a specific key is down. So in this example, you can use the keyboard to move this circle. So those are our basic keyboard events. We'll take a look at how those work. We'll start just with keyIsPressed, which is similar to mouseIsPressed. So I'm going to set up a new sketch. I'm going to do function setup, create a canvas as usual, and function draw, and let's just draw a background. So I'll say the background is 220. And I'll go ahead and check my Sublime server and then go to the browser. So I'm going to go to localhost 8080, go to MMP 210. I haven't added this link yet, so I'll just type in sound version 2 and open the console. We can see that our sound library is here because we got those little warnings, but we can just ignore those. And so now let's make something happen if the key is pressed. So keyIsPressed is just a Boolean value. We can take a look at what that looks like. So if I say text and then keyIsPressed, and I'll make the text a little bit larger just to see it. So it's going to be false most of the time. And if I hit a key, and it doesn't really matter what key I press here, I'm just pressing a bunch of different keys, it'll go to true. So we can leave that there for now. If I want to make some change based on the fact that the key is pressed, I need to use some kind of condition. So for conditional, I start with if, and then key is pressed. So key is pressed is either true or false. If key is pressed is true, let's change the background. So let's say the background is light blue. And so this will match the background of our page. So maybe we should choose something different. I'll use plum like I did last time. So now anytime I have a key pressed, it changes the background color. And so we could also trigger a sound or play images or do other things like that. Right now, the keyIsPressed is inside of my draw function, so I don't really want to trigger a sound here because it would trigger over and over again. And I'll give an example of that a little bit later on in the video. But for now, let's talk about some of the other values that we have. So besides keyIsPressed, we also have the key that was pressed. So if I just show the key here and I'll put it under keyIsPressed, now you can see which key I pressed each time. And P5 has values for all of the letters and numbers. It has one for enter. It doesn't have one for space. It has one for escape and backspace. But it has some like control, shift, alt. The meta key is command on Mac and probably control or the Windows key on Windows. So we can see which key we pressed by looking at that value. And then we can test the key to change what we see on the screen. So for example, after we ask if key is pressed, I could ask another if statement. If key equals, let's say B for blue, then we could say the background is blue. So that's B. If I hit any other key, it's just going to stay gray. Okay, so then I could say if key equals G, we want the background to be green. And it doesn't have to match, like I don't have to match B to blue or G to green. I'm just doing that just to kind of correlate our keys with our colors. But that doesn't necessarily have to be the case. Like I could say if key equals A, then the background is can go back to the plum. So B is blue, G is green, and A is plum. So it doesn't really matter as long as in my condition, the key matches the letter or key value that I'm looking for. So that's a nested if statement. We can also just compare the key code. For example, I could say if I had like if key equals enter, I need a double equals there, then the background is black. And that doesn't seem to be working. What I could do instead is use the key code for enter, which is 13. So I would change key to key code and enter to 13. Now that works fine. So for some of the keys, using the key code is easier. Another one is the space bar. If key equals, we don't have anything for space, so we can use key code, and the code for space is 32. Then I can set the background to white. Now we have black for enter and white for space. And with the key code, I want to make sure to put a little comment here that says enter key, because we don't necessarily know off the top of our heads which key is which, so I'll put space key here just so it's clear what's going on. So those are all happening in our draw function, and that's a good way to use visuals, but it's not such a good way to use sounds. So I'll show you an example of that. I'm going to load my explosion sound from the last video. So I'm going to say variable explosion sound, and I'm going to say function preload and load my sound. So I'll say explosion sound gets load sound, and this one is called explosion-3.wave. And so what we'll see when I use a key press for the sound, so I'm going to just delete all of this stuff and just use the space key here. Okay, so if I say explosion sound.play, that should play the explosion sound. But notice how it's sort of distorted. That's because if I hold the key, because I'm doing it in the draw loop, it's playing the sound over and over and over again. And if we used a longer sound, you would be able to hear it kind of looping over itself. So let's add one more sound. So I also have some chickens, so I'll get my chickens sound. and I'll load that in. So chicken sound equals load sound, and this is chickens.mp3. So in this case, I'll say if key code equals, I'll do 13 for the enter key. I'll say chicken sound.play. So if I play the chicken sound, hopefully you can hear that. And if I play it again, notice how the sounds are layering on top of each other. So that is a default for P5, which if we go and we look at the sound library, we can see how we might change that if we wanted to. So in P5 sound file, there's a method called playMode. And the playMode that is default is called sustain. And that means that it continues playing the sound. It plays multiple instances of the sound. We can change the sound to be restart, which means that it will start again from the beginning. So if I go into setup and I say my chicken sound.play mode is restart, now I won't have that issue anymore where the sound layers. So notice each time I hit the button, the sound restarts from the beginning. But we still have the issue where if I hold the button, the sound is going to be constantly replaying. And so with the chicken sound, you get this long delay before the sound starts. With the explosion sound, we're still going to hear that distortion because it's still set to the sustain mode. So we don't want that. And so one way to get around that is to add some booleans and do a bunch of other stuff to make sure that we only play it once. So for example, we could say, and we could add a little and in here and say explosion sound dot is playing, and then we could make sure that to say that it's not playing. So that's one way to fix it. It's still going to repeat if we're still holding the key down once it stops playing. So another way to deal with this is just to move all of this logic outside of our draw loop, which is constantly being called over and over again, 60 frames per second, and move it into another function which uses a keyPressed event, which only happens when the key is pressed, not continuously if the key is pressed. And so basically, instead of with our draw function, we have like, here's time, okay? With our draw function, every single frame, we're calling draw over and over and over again. So where each frame we're asking if key is pressed. And if it is, then we play a sound. What we're going to do instead is we're going to introduce a keyPressed event, which is its own function. And that will just happen at one point, and then it'll play a sound. And so we'll avoid the issue where we're triggering the sound over and over again. Okay, so let's remove this for now. And I'll say function keyPressed. And I'm going to remove my key visualization as well. So now when the keyPressed function, we know that the key has been pressed, so we don't have to ask if the key has been pressed. We just have to ask which key it is if we want to only go with a certain key. So we can say if key code equals, let's say 13 for enter, then we'll do chicken sound.play. And I'll add my comment here again. Okay, so now the advantage here is if I hold enter, it just plays the chicken sound once. It doesn't re-trigger it. If I hit enter a bunch of times, then it will re-trigger it if that's what I want it to do. So the last thing that we want to do is add in some visuals to go along with our sounds. So we can use the playing property of the sound to add in a visual. So for example, if I want a different background when my chicken sound is playing, I can say if chicken sound dot is playing, and then I can change the background. Maybe I'll make it yellow. And so we can see the background will be yellow for as long as the sound is playing. It's a bit long, but we can see that that works. And then we can begin to add in other sounds. So let's add in our explosion. So let's say if key code equals, I'm just going to use the letters here. So A is 65. So then let's play the explosion. So we'll say explosion sound.play. And this one is not set to the restart mode. It's the default sustain mode, so we can still play the explosions over each other. So we can play the chickens and the explosion sound at the same time. So another thing we might want to do is visualize the explosion sound. So we can use the same logic we did for the chickens, but instead of drawing the background, maybe we'll draw like a shape somewhere. So I'll say if explosion sound is playing, then we could draw an image of an explosion. If you wanted to, download an image, I'm just going to draw like some circles in the shape of an explosion. So I'll draw an ellipse. I guess I could just draw a bunch of random circles. So I'll say ellipse at random width, random height. And for this part of the example, for the assignment, you guys can make your own sound sampler. So you'll choose your own sounds. So you don't have to create the exact visuals that I'm creating. I'm just making something based on the sounds that I'm using. I want to do fill. Fill is red, but let's make it a bit transparent. So I'm going to put 127 at the end to make it half transparent. And then I'll draw a few circles of random width, random height, and then random size as well. And I'll just I'll copy this a few times. At some point, we'll look at a better way to do something like this. But for now, we haven't learned that yet. So I'm just going to make a bunch of copies of that ellipse. And so now if I do an explosion, we get this very quick visual of circles. So I'm also going to turn off no stroke. It does seem like the sound file plays for longer than the sound that we actually hear, but it is coming out of my computer speaker. So it may be the case that it's more audible on headphones or something like that. And so if we wanted to add a bit more to that, we could continue with this and add some more explosions. So I could go back to JFXer. I'll add some more explosions. So that sounds good. I'll just export that, and that's a good one. So I'll just make a couple. Feel free to add as many sound files as you want. And so I'll go to my downloads folder and take those explosions and put them in here. And so then I can just rename these with a dash so that I don't run into issues later on. And so now I have 3 explosions to choose from. And so I just need to add explosion sound 1, explosion sound 2, explosion sound 3, and then I'll just copy this line a few times. There are better ways to do this with code, but we haven't really learned those yet, so I'm just gonna do that this way for now. 1, 2, 3. And so let's just go ABC here. Just kind of choosing that because they're in order. So we'll go 66 is the B key. So A will play explosion sound 1, 2, and then for 67 for the C key, we'll play explosion sound 3. So again, this part I'm just kind of demonstrating, adding a few more explosions. You can feel free to approach this however you want. So I'm just going to copy this whole thing here, and I'm going to do the same thing with each of my explosions. So this is going to be explosion sound 1, this will be 2, this will be 3. This looks like a big block of code, but we'll actually look at ways to do this more efficiently in some lessons following this one. But let's just change the color a bit. So I'll do for the second one, I'll do yellow. So I could change the shape of these as well. I could make these all rectangles, or I could mix and match. I could add images, whatever you think looks cool. For a rectangle, I do need a width and a height, so I'm just going to copy this random, and then I'm going to copy and paste this a bunch of times. So that looks okay. And then for the last one, for the color, let's do something with some green and some blue, since we haven't used those yet. And for the ellipse, let's leave that as it is and see how that looks. So I'm going to refresh this. So we have 3 different explosions, and we can combine them to do different effects. So you don't have to, draw a bunch of different things or do things in a specific way. You don't have to use random. I was just kind of trying to show a few different ways you could do this, but you could just have like images that appear that look like the different things that are drawing on the screen. However you want to approach your assignment is fine. This one should change to yellow, and this one should change to sort of bluish, blue-green. And so yeah, that's basically it for keyboard. We can use different keys and different types of keyboard events. We can trigger sounds, but also trigger visuals based on the key or the sound. So either way is totally fine. And yeah, you can create kind of a silly little chicken sound sampler with some sound effects and some visual effects. So hopefully that will be something fun to work on for this week. So I want to create a thumbnail for this one. It's going to be kind of hard with all the different things going on. So I'm just going to add another key to call the save function while I'm at it, since I'm using keys. So I'm going to say if key code equals, I use S for save, which is 83. So if the key code equals 83 S, then I'll save the image. So that way I can make a thumbnail real quick. So I'll play my chickens and everything else. Okay, so I got a couple there. That one looks pretty good, so I'll just go with that. So we'll call this sound v2. So let's put that in the sound v2. That's our thumbnail. And then I'll go back and I'm just going to close these out and go to the index.html on my main page. I'll scroll down a bit to my last project and just copy and paste that. So the thumbnail for this one is in sound v2, and the thumbnail is also called sound v2, although I put a dash, so I do have to be careful there. And then I'll just include a link to the first one, sound v1. This is just the sound example. And I'll include a link to what we just did, the sound version 2. And this is our keyboard sampler. So let's go home and make sure that link works. So there's sound example. Takes a second to load. And then our keyboard sampler. Okay, so that looks good. So that's it for this video and for this week. Next week, we'll be continuing to work with sound, but we're going to look at new ways of interacting using the mouse and events and creating our own buttons on the page. So I'm going to go ahead and close this out and just upload it on GitHub. So in GitHub, we can see all of our new files. I'll say adds sound sampler version 2 and commit to master and then push to origin. This is another one that you should test online before you submit it, because your sounds may not load if you don't have the files with the correct names and extensions. Go ahead and make sure that this works on your online website before you submit it. Remember just to go to view on GitHub, and you can find your link by going to the settings and clicking on your link there. You can also just create your link by typing it out. So just type out your username.github.io/mmp210 or whatever your portfolio is called. And of course, you can always just go to the class page because I've linked to everybody's sites there. So you can go to the student sites and then click on one of the sites to go to your own page as well. So that's it for this video. Let me know if you have any questions on Discord or just email me.